Long nights. The moments when fear crept into his eyes and he pretended it wasn't there. I handled paperwork. I made sure the house ran smoothly. I listened when he wanted to talk and stayed quiet when he didn't, and somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that effort like that couldn't be ignored. I was wrong. The reading of the will wasn't dramatic. No fender. No arguments at first. Just a small room, a lawyer with a tired voice, and a stack of papers that would quietly rearrange every relationship I thought I understood. Names were read. Assets listed. Numbers spoken like they were nothing more than weather reports. And then it happened. My name didn't come. I waited. Maybe it was later. Maybe I missed it. My heart started beating louder in my ears, each second stretching longer than the last. The lawyer turned the page, continued, still nothing. And then he closed the folder. That was it. No explanation. No pause. Just an ending where my life was supposed to fit. I remember asking softly at first if there had been a mistake. The lawyer looked at me with that careful expression people use when they already know the answer but don't want to hurt you. He said everything had been reviewed, finalized, legally sound. There was nothing addressed to me. No inheritance. No mention, nothing. Around me I could feel the room change. Chairs shifting. Throats clearing. Eyes avoiding mine. And then, almost immediately, the energy shifted again. Relief, excitement, plans forming behind polite expressions. My siblings started talking numbers, properties, future investments. Like, I wasn't even there. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. That's the part that still haunts me. I smiled like it didn't matter. Like being erased didn't hurt. Like I hadn't just lost more than money. I lost proof that I mattered. After that day, the calls stopped. The invites faded. Conversations became short and careful, like I was something fragile or inconvenient. I wasn't angry at first, just confused. I replayed every memory, searching for the moment I must have failed. The mistake that justified cutting me out completely. But nothing made sense. Weeks turned into months. Grief settled in, heavy and exhausting. Not just for my father, but for the family I thought I had. I downsized my life quietly. Adjusted expectations. Learned how to swallow disappointment without choking on it. And slowly, painfully, I accepted the idea that sometimes love doesn't come back to you. No matter how much you give, that acceptance didn't last because betrayal doesn't always end when the damage is done. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it waits until you've finally made peace before reminding you that you were never meant to. It started with a phone call I almost ignored. An unfamiliar number. Late evening. I was tired halfway through a meal I didn't really care about. Something told me to answer. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe fate. Maybe the last thread of hope I hadn't fully cut yet. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. He said his name. Then said something that made me sit down slowly. My heart starting to race before my mind could catch up. He said there was something in my father's estate that required my attention. I told him there had to be a mistake. I'd been written out. He paused just long enough to tell me this wasn't news to him. Then he said a number, 4.2 million. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My body felt like it wasn't listening to me anymore. He explained that this wasn't part of the will. It wasn't listed with the other assets. It had been placed elsewhere, intentionally, protected, hidden in plain sight, and according to documents signed years before my father passed. It belonged to me. In that moment, everything I thought I understood shattered again. But this time, the pieces didn't fall into grief. They fell into clarity. Because suddenly, the silence made sense. The coldness, the speed with which everyone else moved on. They didn't just forget me. They thought they had beaten me. And they had no idea what was coming next. I spent the next few days replaying every detail in my head. How they had looked at me that day, smiling politely while my name disappeared into nothingness. How casually they had divided what they thought was mine. How carefully no one had offered an explanation. Every polite laugh, every slight nod now carried a hidden meaning. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I would disappear quietly. And I realized then that the best revenge isn't loud. It doesn't scream or rage. It waits. It calculates. It hits when the other person believes the story has already ended. I started small, almost imperceptibly, observing, listening, piecing together the patterns I had once ignored because I trusted the people around me. I noticed the tiny cracks in their confidence, the whispers they thought were secret, the way they flaunted their newly gained assets like a shield against anyone who might challenge them. And I remembered something my father once told me years ago in a rare moment of vulnerability. He said, "You don't always see the truth at first, but it's there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the patient eye." I became patient. I learned everything I could about the hidden asset, about the contracts, about the timing. I asked questions that seemed casual. I smiled at family gatherings, masking the storm that had begun quietly inside me. I was patient, but my mind was always moving, calculating. Every detail mattered. Every misstep they had made could be turned into leverage. Every careless word they had spoken could be used. I became invisible and present at the same time, a ghost in plain sight. Learning the weaknesses of those who had thought they could erase me, and then came the first spark of the plan that would change everything. I realized that money wasn't the only thing they had taken from me. They had taken pride, they had taken respect, and most of all, they had taken the narrative of my life and rewritten it without me. That's when I knew that my response had to be equally precise. The asset was mine. The truth was mine. But the satisfaction would come from showing them that no matter how invisible they made me, I could not be erased. I started with small moves, quietly ensuring that their assumptions about me remained just that, assumptions. They saw me smiling at gatherings, polite and calm, occasionally engaged in small talk, never revealing that I knew the full story. I listened as they bragged about investments they believed were secure, about opportunities they thought they had won because I wasn't there to challenge them. I noted everything, names, dates, decisions, a simple miscalculation here, a neglected clause there. The puzzle slowly became clear. Then came the day when I saw them falter. It wasn't planned. I wasn't expecting it. But as I watched from the corner of the room, I saw subtle panic creeping into their voices. The kind of panic that comes when someone realizes that control is slipping through their fingers, and that the one they underestimated might just have the upper hand. I smiled politely. No one noticed. But I knew. And that knowledge, even before the first action was taken, was intoxicating. It wasn't about anger anymore. Anger had its place, but it burns and fades. This was about justice. About restoring the balance that had been broken so casually. And as the days passed, my strategy took shape, quiet and relentless. I had access to the right channels, the right documents, the right timing. And I knew that one misstep from them, one careless display of arrogance, could allow me to reveal the truth in a way they could not ignore. I had to be careful. I had to be flawless. Because the moment I made a mistake, the opportunity could vanish. I practiced my interactions, rehearsed my explanations, and created contingencies for every possible response. I became both predator and tactician, patient and decisive, silent but unstoppable. And yet, even as the plan took shape, the emotional weight of betrayal lingered. Every time I looked at old photographs, I saw the faces of people who had once claimed love and loyalty and had quietly turned away. I remembered my father's quiet voice in those late nights, the advice he gave, the warnings he whispered about human nature. All of it came together now in a new clarity. I understood not only who they were, but also who I had to become to correct the wrongs. I knew that when the time came, I would have to act in a way that left no room for doubt. Not just to reclaim what was mine, but to ensure that they understood the consequences of underestimating someone they thought they had broken. It was no longer a question of money or inheritance. It was about respect, about truth, about setting the record straight. Every conversation, every meeting, every casual encounter became a test. I learned what each of them valued most. I learned what they feared. I cataloged every slight, every arrogant smile, every miscalculation, every hint of overconfidence. And in those private, silent moments, I imagined the moment when all of it would be revealed, when the full picture would unfold and leave them speechless, unable to defend against the consequences of their own actions. Then came the breakthrough. A document buried in plain sight, overlooked because of arrogance and familiarity. A clause, a loophole, a simple technicality that meant that everything they assumed as secure could be challenged. and I was the only one who had noticed. The moment I understood its potential, I felt a thrill that I had not experienced in months. Finally, all the patience, all the observation, all the quiet calculation had led to a tangible advantage. I began testing the waters. Small questions. Casual inquiries that appeared innocent but hinted at awareness. Each reaction was carefully noted. Each hesitation catalogued. And with every misstep they made, I knew the moment of revelation was approaching. I had built a path, silent and deliberate, that would lead to the point where I could reclaim not only the asset but the dignity that had been stripped from me. But even as I advanced, I had to navigate carefully, because betrayal leaves marks not only on those who are deceived, but also on those who are still trusted. I had to maintain the illusion of normalcy to appear harmless while assembling the pieces of the puzzle that would one day dismantle their carefully constructed narrative. It was exhausting. It was relentless. But it was necessary. And then the first confrontation came, not with shouting or anger, but with a simple observation that caught them off guard. A casual mention of the overlooked clause. Their faces froze. I could see the flicker of recognition, the first hint that they had underestimated me. I smiled quietly, letting the silence speak louder than any words I could have used. They didn't know what to say, and I didn't need them to. The moment itself was already powerful. I realized then that the journey had shifted. It was no longer just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about demonstrating that patience, observation, and strategy could outweigh arrogance and betrayal. Every careful move I had made, every silent calculation had led to this tipping point. And I felt a clarity I hadn't felt since the day I first read that will. The path ahead would be delicate. The stakes higher than ever. I knew I had to maintain my composure to execute flawlessly. To wait for the perfect moment when the culmination of all my efforts would leave no doubt, no room for escape. No opportunity for them to twist the narrative back in their favor. And as I looked back on the months of preparation, the quiet suffering, the careful observation, I realized something profound. Revenge, when executed with precision and patience, was not about destruction. It was about restoration. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about ensuring that the story was told accurately, that justice, however delayed, was inevitable. I was ready. Not in the loud, dramatic way people imagine when they think of confrontation, but in the quiet, steady way that comes from knowing the ground beneath your feet will not collapse when you take the next step. Readiness, I learned, is not excitement. It is calm, it is the absence of doubt. And for the first time since my name vanished from that document, I felt calm. I didn't rush. That was the hardest part. Every instinct told me to move faster, to reveal everything, to force answers and apologies and admissions. But instinct is emotional, and emotion makes mistakes. I had waited this long. I could wait a little longer. Timing would decide whether this ended in chaos or in clarity. I began by tightening my circle. Fewer conversations. Fewer appearances. I let them believe I was retreating again, that the brief flicker of confidence they had seen was nothing more than a passing moment. People who believe they have won grow careless. They relax. They speak freely. And that is when truth leaks out. I watched it happen slowly. One of them started spending more aggressively, confident that their share of the estate would cover everything. Another made promises based on future returns that were not as secure as they believed. They spoke about expansion, about leverage, about using what they had inherited as proof of their intelligence and success. They talked as if the story was already written, as if the ending could not change. They never once considered that I was still part of it. I maintained my role perfectly, calm, polite, slightly distant. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, it was measured, almost hesitant, as if I were unsure of myself. That illusion mattered. People reveal more when they think you are harmless. Inside, I was assembling everything. Every document, every message, every overlooked detail. I created a timeline so precise it could not be challenged. Dates lined up. Signatures matched. Intent became undeniable. This wasn't speculation or emotion. It was fact. And facts, when presented correctly, have a way of dismantling even the strongest lies. There were moments when the weight of it all nearly pulled me under. Late at night, when the world was quiet and there was no one to perform for, the betrayal came back in waves. I would remember how easily they had let me walk away that day, how quickly they had accepted my absence. That pain didn't disappear. It sharpened my focus. I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not for revenge alone. Not for money alone. But because allowing betrayal to go unanswered teaches people that loyalty has no value. I could not let that be the lesson of my life. The first real move happened quietly. No announcements. No accusations. Just a formal request sent through the proper channels backed by documentation they did not know I had. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. And it landed exactly where it needed to. The response was immediate. Phones started ringing. Messages came in faster than I could answer them. Confusion first. Then irritation. Then concern. The tone shifted with each hour that passed. People who had ignored me for months suddenly wanted to talk. They wanted clarity. They wanted reassurance. I gave them none. Silence, I learned, is power when used correctly. When we finally sat down together, the air felt different. Heavier, tense. Gone were the easy smiles and confident gestures. They were guarded now, cautious in a way they had never been around me before. They asked questions carefully. I answered just enough to confirm that I knew more than they wanted me to. I watched their reactions closely. The tightening of a jaw. The quick glance exchanged between them. The subtle shift in posture when they realized this was not something they could dismiss or delay. For the first time, they were reacting to me, not around me. They tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. A technical issue. Something that could be smoothed over quietly. I let them talk. Let them explain. Let them convince themselves that control was still within reach. And when they finished, I corrected them calmly. I told them this was not a misunderstanding. It was an omission. And omissions, when intentional, carry consequences. That was the moment everything changed. Their confidence cracked. Not completely. Not yet. But enough for me to see what lay beneath it. Fear, uncertainty, the realization that the story they'd been telling themselves was incomplete and that the missing chapter belonged to me. They asked what I wanted. It was almost laughable, as if the answer hadn't been obvious all along. I told them I wanted what was rightfully mine. No more, no less. I told them I wasn't interested in drama or public scenes. I was interested in correction, in fairness, in truth. They hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. If they had believed they were right, they would have refused immediately. If they had believed they were safe, they would have pushed back. Instead, they stalled. They suggested delays, reviews, additional consultations. Anything to buy time. Time, however, was no longer on their side. I left that meeting without agreement, but with certainty. Certainty that I had stepped into the role they never thought I would fill. Certainty that the ground beneath them was no longer stable. Certainty that the next move would determine who walked away intact and who didn't. In the days that followed, the pressure intensified. Subtle attempts at persuasion turned into quiet threats. Not direct, not obvious, but clear enough to understand. They questioned my motives, my credibility, my memory. They hinted that pushing further could damage relationships permanently. I listened. I acknowledged. I did not retreat. What they failed to understand was that the damage had already been done. Permanence had already been achieved. You cannot unbreak trust. You can only decide how you live once it is gone. Then came the moment they made their biggest mistake. They underestimated how prepared I was to go all the way. They assumed I would stop once things became uncomfortable, that I would value peace over principle, that I would choose silence again if pressured hard enough. That assumption, more than anything else, sealed their fate, because I had already accepted the cost. I had already let go of the version of family I wished they were. I had already grieved the relationships they thought I would protect at my own expense. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous in a way they could not control. When the final notice went out, it was formal, clear, and impossible to ignore. There was no anger in it, no accusation, just a presentation of facts and the next steps required to address them. It was clean, professional, unavoidable. The reactions were immediate and chaotic. Calls came at all hours. Voices raised. Accusations flew. They tried guilt. They tried nostalgia. They tried reminding me of childhood memories and shared history, as if those things could erase deliberate choices made by grown adults. I listened to it all quietly, patiently. And when they finally asked why I was doing this, why I couldn't just let it go, I told them the truth. Because letting it go would mean agreeing that I deserved to be erased. And I didn't. The room went silent. For the first time since this began, they had no response. I could see it in their faces. The realization settling in slowly, painfully. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about accountability. And accountability, once demanded, does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. As I walked away from that final conversation, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying a weight you were never meant to bear alone. The outcome was no longer uncertain. It was inevitable. The days that followed were quieter, yet more intense than anything I had experienced before. The storm had passed, but the calm was deceptive. I knew that even though the first wave had broken over them, the undercurrents were still shifting, unseen but powerful. Every interaction became a test. Every glance, a reminder. They didn't trust me, not fully. They couldn't, and that lack of trust became my ally. I moved carefully, claiming what was mine without fanfare. Each transaction, each acknowledgement was precise, almost surgical. No overreactions. No dramatic gestures. Just facts, consequences, and the unshakable certainty that had been absent for months. People around me began noticing the change, subtle but unmistakable. The air carried a weight. Conversations stopped mid-sentence and my presence entered a room. Decisions were reconsidered quietly, hastily, as if a shadow had fallen over what they thought was secure, and then came the calls. One by one, apologies arrived, thinly veiled in excuses but betraying their awareness that they had miscalculated. They tried negotiation, manipulation, even charm, as if charm could undo years of deliberate exclusion. I listened. I acknowledged. I did not yield. Each word they offered became another confirmation that the truth could not be denied, and that the balance of power had shifted permanently. I reflected often on the strange irony of it all. I had once thought that losing them would destroy me, that being written out of the will was a final cruel verdict on my worth. But the real revelation came in the aftermath. Losing them, or at least losing their perceived control over me, had freed me. For the first time, I was operating without fear, without expectation, without the suffocating weight of assumed obligations. Freedom gave clarity. Clarity gave strength. Strength gave precision. The final meeting, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Not because the confrontation lacked intensity, but because the outcome was already written in the meticulous preparation and patience that had led to it. They arrived with confidence still clinging to them like a thin veil, but it was fragile. I could see the hesitance in their eyes, the careful calibration of every word before it escaped their lips. I spoke first, calmly, deliberately. No anger, no shouting. Just the facts laid out in a manner that left no room for argument. They listened, incredulous, realizing too late that their assumptions had cost them more than they could have predicted. The asset that had been mine all along was confirmed, secured, and recognized publicly in the way it had always deserved to be. But the recognition was more than financial. It was acknowledgement, vindication, proof that erasure, no matter how meticulously executed, cannot erase truth. As I watched their reactions, I understood something crucial. They were speechless not just because of what had been revealed, but because they had never truly known me. They had underestimated the patience, the observation, the quiet persistence it took to reclaim what they assumed was gone. That misjudgment, small in its moment, had accumulated into a final, undeniable lesson. I didn't gloat. That was never the point. Satisfaction, when properly earned, does not need to be shouted. It is a quiet certainty, a steady presence that resonates louder than any words or gestures. And in that quiet, I finally felt a measure of peace. Not joy in their discomfort, but relief that the narrative had been restored. That justice had been enacted in a manner as deliberate as the betrayal had once been. Life, afterwards, settled into a rhythm I had not anticipated. I was free to rebuild, to step forward unencumbered by the shadows of those who had sought to define my worth. I invested my energy in meaningful work, in relationships that mattered, in a future I could shape without the weight of manipulation or false loyalty. The lessons lingered, subtle and constant: vigilance, patience, discernment. Trust, when earned, is precious. And betrayal, while painful, can reveal strength you never knew existed. I found new confidence in myself, not just because I had reclaimed what was mine, but because I had done it on my terms with integrity and precision. The past could not be changed, but its impact could be redefined. I could choose how to respond, how to move forward, and how to allow these experiences to shape me without breaking me. And even though I had been tested, pushed to the edge of despair, and left questioning my own worth, I understood something essential. The people who seek to diminish you can only succeed if you allow them to. By recognizing the truth, preparing patiently, and acting decisively, you reclaim not only what was taken, but also control over your own story in quiet moments. I would reflect on the journey, remembering the shock, the disbelief, the silent rage that had fueled the careful planning. I remembered how it felt to be invisible, disregarded, written out of a life I had believed was secure. And I remembered with clarity and satisfaction how each calculated step had transformed that pain into empowerment. The finality of it was profound. Not because the betrayal was punished in a spectacular way, but because justice had been enacted. The narrative, once stolen from me, was now mine to tell. The lesson was clear. Integrity, patience, and steadfastness matter more than immediate satisfaction. The world may attempt to erase you, underestimate you, or betray you, but truth, when pursued methodically, cannot be denied. And so I stepped forward, not with vengeance in my heart, but with a calm assurance that comes from having endured, prepared, and acted with purpose. My story, once altered by others, was now restored. The silence that had haunted me for months became a testament to resilience. The quiet before a measured, deliberate triumph. I had been ready. And now, finally, everything aligned to confirm that readiness had been my greatest ally. The final pieces fell into place almost quietly, as if the universe itself had been waiting for this exact moment. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting matches, no vindictive speeches. Just acknowledgement, understanding, and the undeniable truth that had been buried beneath arrogance, assumption, and betrayal. What had been mine, legally, morally, and emotionally, was now fully recognized. And that recognition carried with it a weight far heavier than money or property ever could. The weight of justice. I spent the following days reflecting on everything that had happened. Replaying the journey from that first moment, I saw my name erased to this final clarity. I realized that betrayal, while devastating, is also a mirror. It shows who we are, who we allow ourselves to be, and the strength we possess when the world attempts to diminish us. I had been forced to confront the worst of human nature, but in doing so, I had discovered the best of my own. I didn't need to celebrate or flaunt the victory. True triumph doesn't require an audience. It exists quietly in the knowledge that you have endured, acted wisely, and reclaimed what was lost. And as I walked through spaces that had once felt suffocating, I could feel the difference. The air was lighter. My steps were steadier. The lingering shadows of doubt and betrayal no longer had power over me. I had reclaimed control not just over assets, but over my own narrative, my own life. The people who had betrayed me eventually realized the full scope of what they had done. Not because I told them, but because the truth revealed itself in time. Their attempts to maintain appearances could not hide the imbalance. They had underestimated patience, diligence, and quiet determination, the very qualities that had enabled me to endure their deception and emerge unbroken. And in that realization, I found something unexpected, a sense of closure. Not because I held power over them, but because their choices had shown me clearly who they were, and I no longer needed their approval, love, or recognition to validate myself. In the quiet moments afterward, I allowed myself to grieve not for what was lost, but for what had never truly been mine. The relationships that had been tainted by betrayal, the trust that had been broken, the illusions of family and loyalty, all of it needed acknowledgement. I faced those feelings not to dwell, but to release. Pain that is unprocessed lingers. Pain that is confronted transforms into wisdom and strength. And I embraced that transformation fully. I also learned the importance of patience and strategy. So often, people think that justice is instantaneous or dramatic. But life rarely delivers in perfect timing. True resolution comes from observation, preparation, and the willingness to act when the moment aligns perfectly with principle. I had learned to move carefully, to plan meticulously, and to allow events to unfold in a way that honored both truth and prudence. In the end, the $4.2 million was never the point. It was a tangible representation of recognition, accountability, and restored balance. What mattered more was the reclamation of self-respect, the confirmation of my worth, and the restoration of the story that had been stolen from me. Money could have been taken away again, but integrity, preparedness, and moral clarity could not. Life after that day felt different. I approached relationships with discernment, with a clear understanding of who deserved trust and who did not. I valued loyalty, honesty, and respect in ways I had not fully appreciated before. And I understood, finally, that betrayal, while painful, can be a teacher if we allow it to guide us rather than destroy us. I often think back to that first day in the lawyer's office, when the page turned and my name did not appear. I remember the shock, the disbelief, the sense of erasure, and I realize now that day was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far greater, the awakening of resolve, the honing of patience, and the discovery of the inner strength that had always been within me. Waiting for the moment it would be needed most. The moral is clear. Life will sometimes try to erase us, to rewrite our stories without consent. People will betray us, misjudge us, and underestimate our resilience. But if we are observant, patient, and deliberate, we can reclaim not only what was taken, but also control over our own narrative. True justice is rarely loud, rarely immediate. It is precise, inevitable, and lasting when approached with wisdom and courage. And as I close this chapter, I carry forward the lesson that no betrayal is ever absolute, no erasure permanent, and no injustice final if we act with clarity, perseverance, and unwavering belief in our own worth. I was tested. I was betrayed. I was written out. And yet, here I stand, whole, acknowledged, and unbroken. Not because I sought revenge, but because I demanded truth, and in doing so, I found myself. Asterisk if this story left you shocked, speechless, or inspired. Make sure you hit that like button to show your support. It really helps stories like this reach more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next tale of betrayal, revenge, and unexpected justice. Every story here is real, emotional, and dramatic, just like this one. By subscribing, you'll join our community of viewers who love to uncover the shocking twists and powerful lessons hidden in every story. So don't wait, subscribe, and join us for the next story that will leave you questioning loyalty, trust, and what people are truly capable of when pushed to their limits.